And I worked for the Denver Post for a while and then went out to Washington to work for the Washington Post, but was still, a Coloradan at heart. I wanted to be back in sort of community journalism where you can kind of have a direct impact on the people you're covering. I tried to talk to a lot of people in the community and leaders in the community. And El Paso County still has the highest rate of teen suicide in the state. We're one of the healthiest states in terms of physical health in the country, but when it comes to mental health, we're one of the worst states in the country for access to care, for the number of people who have mental illness, and we rank 48th out of 50 states in access of care and quality of care for children. That really caught my attention, and we decided we really needed to start writing and reporting about that. One of the things we want to really zero in on as we go forward is good things that are happening, examples and models for others, and we think NAMI is exactly that. Our last story will be, okay, what are the solutions? How do we go about being better at mental health care in Colorado? That NAMI will be absolutely one of the leading lights.
I first came to NAMI back in 2010 when my son was diagnosed with schizophrenia.
Chris receiving his diagnosis changed our relationship a bit because it was all so new. I had to learn a lot myself to be able to be a good sister and to understand what he's going through.
I realized that their relationship had changed. It's almost as if Stephanie had one brother and now she had a new brother. He had really lost the ability to be social. He was fearful about being away from me. His symptoms were so strong at one point that if I had to go to the bathroom and he was awake, he had to stand outside the door.
My high school found out, and no one understood mental illness. I hate to say it, but they treated him and me as if my brother was disgusting. My mother took family to family, and that was our first introduction with NAMI.
I felt, before I discovered this, I felt almost as if I was the only one going through this.
Better education in the community around mental illness would have prevented a witch hunt.
1 out of every 100 people has schizophrenia. And, that's only 1%. But when you look at it in numbers, if, for example, you walk through a mall, how many people are in that mall? How many people are suffering?
My background actually is as a professor. I've really seen the important connection between faith and people's just overall well-being. Churches are often one of the first points of contact when somebody struggles with mental illness. I think a lot of it comes down to why. Why is this happening to me, or why is this happening to a loved one? When it comes to mental illness, if pastors feel over their head, they don't really know what to do, so we just kind of pretend it doesn't exist.
And we're struggling with depression, anxiety. A lot of times it's really hard for churches and even pastors to understand. And then once I started coming here, once I met Dr. E and I heard him speak, how much I was like, oh my God, it's okay for me to not be okay.
So where does Bridges for Hope fit into the continuum of care that churches offer? I think it'd be great for a church to bring this in, the training for their staff, and let's just equip people. When you equip people with understanding, you also empower them to make a difference. Partnering with NAMI and agencies like that is really beneficial for churches, and I think it's a great way if you want to change the posture of your church towards your community, then embrace those people who are also doing the same thing.
I oversee the programming side of the community center, and so that encompasses staff development and training, the program and partner outreach, and creation of new partnerships.
My role with Parks and Rec is to work with all of our staff and the public from a safety standpoint to improve safety throughout our workspace, as well as the public workspace.
Mental health first aid training is an in-depth view at a variety of mental illnesses, as well as how to support those who are living with them.
I got introduced to the idea of mental health first aid we were just trying to look for education and training for our employees, because we deal with so much of the public and then a lot of the homeless population, and that is one of the largest issues with the homeless population is the mental health illness associated with it. And we just wanted to have our employees have the opportunity to identify what that might look like, and then also have techniques to kind of handle that. You know, here's an illness, here's how you kind of see it in someone, here's how we can get them the help. And that was huge for a lot of our staff members.
Coming out of that training, it's kind of like the forefront of the stigma change, and have something like mental health first aid as a champion to help push that knowledge out into the general public has been just invaluable.
I would say about 80% of my calls would deal with mental disorders or some kind of trauma that's causing an outburst. CIT, for me, crisis intervention training, it really broadened my knowledge upon the emotional state of people. You realize the stuff they talked about in that training, you're just like, wow, I know what they're saying now. I know what they meant by I would recognize it. This morning we went to a restraining order violation down at another hotel of ours. And during that time, he made it known that he was prior service in the military and that he was diagnosed with PTSD. He couldn't sit still. Another thing you learn in CIT is stimming. Stimming is when they focus on something. It'll be a string, hand, something. It's like a calming mechanism. I actually promote CIT a lot in our department here. And every time I tell an officer, I'm like, you know, if you go to CIT training, you would learn how to deal with this in a different way, so we don't have to get in a yelling match with somebody. You'll have those certain people that want to do the suicide by cop by barricading themselves in there, or running at you with a knife, or they do some kind of action that's just enough that it puts that officer's life in jeopardy. And he has to make that split second, and I mean split second decision. What am I gonna do?
Urban Pink is a homeless youth shelter. We work with individuals aged 15 to 24 through various programs, housing, the shelter, and then our outreach department. Because maybe a lot of our clients have come from environments where it is a topic that you just don't talk about, either families or peers just aren't there to support the client as they're struggling with their own mental health. When they come here, we have a space where they can find those connections, and I think that that's really important. In Our Own Voice presentation consisted of 2 peers that came out from NAMI. They were volunteers that told their stories to our clients. One of the things that really connected with our clients is the male presenter that came out. He himself had struggled with homelessness. During the In Our Own Voice presentation, we had a client. He was a minor. He was a youth here who was kicked out of his home for having a mental illness, which is in his family was like just something that was very taboo. So when he came to the presentation and they presented this information about this family support group, it kind of opened his eyes, like, oh, there's a support group. My mom can go to this and she can learn more information and she can have conversations, and you know, maybe I can go home now because my mom can begin to recognize that mental illness is not something that's bad or negative. It's just a part of me being who I am. For him to have that material access to him and begin to open that conversation is really, really impactful.
I was introduced to the Below the Surface program at first through the posters. Everybody thinks I'm happy, but you know, I'm really not. What's really going on below the surface with kids, especially adolescents? The whole world has just changed with all the social media. It's really impacted bullying. It's impacted the way kids evaluate themselves. So when I first heard about the ability to text a crisis line, I thought it was a great idea because that's all the kids do. I have a student who I've been working with pretty seriously for an extended amount of time. He seemed very agitated, so I asked him to come in my office and have some downtime. The whole time he was in there, though, he's texting like a mad person. And so finally I asked him, I said, "What are you doing? Who are you texting?" And he goes, "I'm texting that crisis line you told us about yesterday." And a few minutes later, the phone rings, and it's the lady from the text line. And she is so concerned about the student in my office that she has called me to tell me that he is hearing things, he's seeing things, he wants to hurt himself and others, and he needs an immediate intervention. Of course, when we talk to our students about this in the class, we shared that this is not talking, you're texting a counselor, and you're going back and forth, and that's where it stays. The particular incident I talked about was very unique. This kid was in dire straits that day. The way this Below the Surface program has impacted me is it provided me an opportunity to share with a large group of kids how much we care for them, and that NAMI has made a point of going into some place that we hadn't gone 5 years ago.